So Jules, thank you very much for joining me this morning. We're going to have a conversation about your career and your tips for aspiring musicians. And this is going to go out as part of our Cheltenham Music Festival replay series, which is happening from the 4th of July on our website and YouTube and other social media channels. So let's start at the beginning. Were you always into music, even as a really young kid, or is it something that came a bit later? How did it start for you?
I was always into listening to music as a kid. Obviously, like a lot of my friends and colleagues and your friends and colleagues, some of those guys started violin when they were like 2.5. For me, that was a little bit different. I dabbled in the piano at about 6 and it didn't really work out. I think I was just a little bit of a little bit too crazy to have the concentration at the time to really undertake what was required. But at the same time, my brother and my dad and all my family really was just always listening to music, really. So the radio was on all the time, and car journeys to school or to holidays or whatever would always have music on, and my dad would have a sort of a large collection of cassettes in his little VW Polo or whatever. Yeah, so kind of we often knew what albums he had, so we would kind of make sure that the right albums were in the car, because of course dads have a certain type of taste, and generally young kids have a different type of taste. Yeah, so I didn't really get into music as a physical study, I suppose, until I was about 9 when I picked up the trumpet. Yeah.
And was it kind of, did you know straight away that the trumpet was the instrument for you? Was it love at first sight?
Well, actually, hilariously, I wanted to play the sax, I think, and a little letter came round from school, do you want to learn an instrument? And I didn't know what a saxophone was called. I had no idea. I just knew it sounded great. And I think on this sheet, in a rush, I quickly scribbled an X in the trombone slot, which is hilarious because so I went along to the sort of, it wasn't an audition, it was more like to see if the embouchure would work for the instrument, and it clearly didn't work, but my teacher Kathy, she put a trumpet in my hand and said, "Oh, let's try this," and that seemed to work a bit better at that time, blowing a raspberry down the mouthpiece or whatever. But yeah, it's funny. I think I still remember this crazy sensation of being able to make a tone, to produce a sound through this alien instrument, and being really enchanted by that straight away. And yeah, it was an amazing feeling when I look back on it. I think that the core studies come from the classical tree. All of the starting to think about intervals, scales, long notes, breathing, production, etc., etc. But at the same time, my teacher got me into Miles Davis immediately. Which it's very easy for that to sound pretentious, but it's not. It's just what happened, basically. And when I look back, I think that's really crazy for a teacher in Aylesbury to thrust a Miles Davis. I think it was a cassette. In fact, I think she had a mixture of great trumpet players on there, like Clifford Brown and all sorts of guys on it, Dizzy and Miles. But Miles I was immediately drawn to just because he had this sort of mysterious character, and all of his pictures and album covers and stuff is like, whoa, this guy's a bit weird, and at that time that was really interesting, and in honesty it was just much more visceral music for me to listen to then, and the idea of the freedom of it, which essentially freedom of expression and the kind of freedom is what jazz is all about. I think that appealed to me as a 9-year-old kid, more than doing scales, to be honest.
Yeah, fair enough. So throughout your teens, when did you know that music was kind of going to be the thing that you wanted to focus on and that you wanted to study?
I think by the time I was about 12 years old, for me it was already quite clear that I was absolutely passionate about it. I think embarking on an exploratory journey of finding out what my ears, how they connected to the sound, how I listened to tones, how I might be able to play or sing phrases back. It was something that up to that point I hadn't explored, and I felt like I had a pretty good set of ears. So essentially from quite a young age, I think from 12 I already was sure that I wanted to be only a musician, and I didn't really have any other. I mean, I probably wanted to be a footballer as well, but I was really bad. I think in my third year of studies, or after 2.5 years, I shifted my degree focus away from the trumpet and into composition. So it required quite a long period of adjustment and some really serious in-depth study at speed to get myself on track with that. And
where did composition come from?
I'd always been composing through my teens, and I directly connect improvisation and composition. They're within the same creative bracket for me. And I'd been writing for the ensembles that were available at my at Aylesbury Music Centre. So there was multiple brass bands from kind of junior to senior, I suppose, and junior big band up to senior, and so forth, with the orchestra the same. And yeah, I'd been writing through my teens, and I knew I loved composing as much as playing. And I think when I got to Guildhall, I had a fantastic trumpet teacher, Anne McInerney. She's just absolutely awesome. And we worked really hard on changing my embouchure, because I had a really terrible technique. I can't remember what Anne's. She phrased it very well at the time. I think her words were, "How do you even make a sound?" Or playing like that, or yeah. So it was. I had a brilliant time with Anne, and but essentially during the time of reassembling the embouchure, it's like if you imagine you were an athlete and you've always run in a particular way, then at the point when someone says, right, we need to change this, it means that your endurance to run significantly diminishes. So essentially, in musical terms, it means the amount of minutes and hours per day you can play greatly reduces. And if you're a elite standard music college, you need to find ways to be creative. You can't sit in your room crying into the corner and just playing like low notes. Although, some people did do that. But I think for me, it was also just that I was so engrossed with the ensembles I was hearing in college, and I was so in love with what I was surrounded by, that it opened a few other doors in my mind. So at a certain point, I made an abrupt decision overnight to audition for the composition course. And that therefore meant I had my focus was then kind of supercharged to just doing one thing, because I knew it was a challenge. There was definite pessimism within certain camps of certain people within the establishment at that time, which I can understand, because when a sort of cocky kid comes up and says, "Oh, I'm doing this now," you don't undertake one instrument lightly, and you certainly don't undertake writing lightly. But I'd been doing it my whole teens, so it wasn't like I couldn't do it. It's just that that wasn't my specialism that I was known for. So that
and you just knew that was the right thing for you. That was what you needed to do.
Yeah, exactly. I just had to express myself this way, and for any budding composer or arranger, I think all of us, whatever the level you're at this point in time, we can all attest to the fact that the first time you hear your arrangement or composition played, it's probably still the most magical moment in a way. You might have many, many beautiful moments along the path, but there's something about hearing, I don't know, this first chord or this first melody away from your pencil and paper or, you know, your software and stuff. And that to me was a sort of an awakening moment, I guess. And then the heritage orchestra creation actually came out of myself and a couple of buddies. We were probably in our third year of college at that point, and we kept joking about setting up a Wagnerian-sized ensemble because no one had really done that. And it was, of course, ridiculous because anyone that has, you know, been to listen live to Wagner will notice that, you know, generally the orchestra or orchestras are pretty big. So we knew that wouldn't quite be possible because we didn't have a million tubas and I don't know what else. But we'd constantly been sort of going along with this idea. And so I think a lot of people knew I wanted to set something up a little bit different. And at a certain point, Chris was running a club night in Cargo, which is this club in Shoreditch. And he phoned me up and he said, "Hey, I know you wanna do something a little bit more expansive. Do you want to put together a group to do something on this night?" So at the beginning, it wasn't like, okay, we're going to set up a group now and we're going to go forward with it. At the beginning, it was just like, "Hey guys, do you want to do one gig for fun? We're going to pile into Cargo. We're going to steal all the chairs from the restaurant and we're going to take some gaffer tape and stick the music to our backs. And we're going to do a combination of original compositions and some existing stuff and let's see what happens," you know. The match got struck. Now, interestingly, and I'm not advising this for anyone in their last year of college, but I made the decision to sacrifice my curriculum required compositions in favour of just like going guns blazing into this group, because the gig was in June and my memory is that you had to submit your compositions probably in May or June to, you know. So I knew it probably would have a negative impact on my degree, but I can certainly say now, and I'm not endorsing this, guys, but since I got my degree, no one has ever asked me what degree I got, ever. And I've never had to present my degree. And I don't think you go to music college to get a degree. I believe you go to music college to learn more and to continue your love and passion for music and to basically hang out with some killer teachers and, you know, learn from these guys because they're the word, aren't they? Because I think the image, especially when you come to any of those sort of really high level institutions, naturally you view these, it's sometimes difficult to see what happens after, right? You've got this bubble that you're existing in, like what do I do at the end of the years, or where do I go next? And obviously some people, they came to college with a very specific path of which they kind of stuck to. One path would be, okay, I want to get a job in a professional orchestra. I don't mind who they are and I don't mind where it is, you know. So in some ways that's kind of cool because you can just be quite zen about it, get into the practice room, do your thing and smash the audition and, you know.
You're there.
But then for other people, they would come to college and that would be their initial aim, but then all these doors were being open to them and it would create not doubt necessarily, but it would just pose more questions to themselves about what they might do. And for other people, they'd come to college with no idea of what they wanted to do, which is, you know.
And don't you think that at music college particularly, and I wonder if this really only happens with music or performance, but there will be people at music college who in that bubble are thought to be amazing and the standout kind of stars of their year, if you like. But 10 years on, they might not be the people who you're seeing up on the stage or who've got really big careers. It doesn't necessarily follow at music college. If you're very successful in that environment, it doesn't necessarily follow that you will then be successful out of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, some people, to begin with, they take longer to mature, you know. Some people might have only started down let's take a jazz players. I remember in my first year we had a beautiful collection of individuals and musicians, but we all came in at a different standard. So you're right. It's like there were some players in our year that were just like slaying everything, and you're like, oh, whoa, like it's the pond had significantly increased in size. Another element is if you're not getting a job in an orchestra, then you need elements like entrepreneurial elements and, I guess social awareness in the working environment. You need pretty solid organizational skills. Or if you're like me, you just attempt to get by without those skills. There are many elements, right, that make up the one person that then goes forth. And I think what was always interesting for me was, as a kid, there were some kids that were just like ninjas at their instrument, but they had a support system around them of their parents, and maybe the next circle outwards would be the council music service or the music school or something, and so forth. And so that kind of kept them all on the right path, And I think when you get to, when you go to college, you also are set free a bit, and people have to have time to explore what that is and enjoy that and express themselves in as many ways as they can. And I think maybe for some musicians that helped their work, and for other musicians that maybe was harder to adjust to because they had always been in a kind of protective bubble. And even though I was saying college is a bubble, it's, as you said, it's super competitive, and the atmosphere can be quite intimidating at times. And I think different personalities react in a different way to that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think sometimes, there are some people who are just incredibly ridiculously talented from a really young age, and they're just a breed apart almost. But I think sometimes some of the most interesting artists are people who kind of, grow and develop and come out of themselves as they get older, and keep doing interesting things and learning more about themselves. And I think it feels when you leave college that there's a huge pressure to suddenly achieve and be doing stuff. But actually, it's okay to take your time if you need to.
I completely agree, because also at colleges, they all have, competitions. What's that all about? Once you leave college, these competitions don't exist in the real world, right? And so you already feel a real sense of pressure. Okay, cool, it's coming around to like the kind of the Strawberry Heart competition, and you've got to get your entry in, and you're going to be up against some killer violin players or whatever. And of course that doesn't really mean anything, because I think if I look back to when I started music at the age of 9 or whatever it was, I didn't see my trajectory at kind of ending at 21. I think for everybody, you should remain a student of the music for your whole life, and it should be if it's a real passion, it should be something that you're constantly learning. Always should be looking to learn new things, and never get kind of caught in a repetitive pattern. And in that regard, just everybody has a different makeup. But for me and for many of my friends, it's all about kind of a lifelong learning and appreciation of music.
Have you ever had periods where you felt like you were stuck a little bit and had stopped that learning process? Or do you think you've quite successfully managed to keep kind of progressing the whole time?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for me personally, my original aim was once I switched to composition was to be a composer only. So hilariously, I remember kind of flippantly mentioning to a friend, I'm not going to be an arranger. I don't want to be an arranger. So the path that I've sort of been traveling along, I've often kind of just, I guess I've had targets in mind, but I've also just kind of have a philosophy of try to let things flow and just see where the path goes, you know.
Is that how you ended up conducting? I mean, because you're very well known as a conductor.
Well, the conducting really kicked in the same way as your friend that you mentioned from the ensemble you set up, because I wanted to really develop my skills. And that was in tandem with the fact that there was no one around to conduct my music. And the third link was that at that time, you only got 30 minutes of music with an orchestra in 4 years, which is really rubbish. You can't... Yeah, because trial and error, I guess maybe we come to that in a bit or whatever, but at least for me, that's been the best lesson of all. And you can't have that without hands-on experience. Now the composition, the conducting classes in Guildhall were great. They were really fun, but I knew I wanted to develop that myself. So I came to it in a pretty hodgepodge way. And obviously having your own ensemble is a great way to develop that if you are able to have that platform.
So you mentioned trial and error. When you're thinking of, maybe failure isn't the right word, maybe it is more trial and error. When you're thinking of times where you've had to do that and learn, and not always get things right first time, is there anything that stands out? Do you think that's an important part of the process?
Yeah, I think it's a super important part of the process. In terms of your learning curve, obviously number one is trying to find a teacher that is really like a guru that, you know, doesn't necessarily have all the answers. It's not about that. I think it's just about helping you to open up the parts of your mind and to keep you inspired. But the trial and error thing, even when I was at college, you know, that's happening because of course they were brilliant. They would let people run ensembles, you know, on all of the courses there was really a kind of a push to help you to be hands-on in all ways, which is brilliant. And I think the trial and error side for me though was the greatest lesson, because sometimes I just bit off more than I could chew, you know. So when I look back on the best lessons that I've had, the best ones have always been, you know, going into a concert project that you're not qualified to undertake and falling flat on your face is in some ways a very sobering and humbling and good way of putting a mirror up to yourself and realizing, okay, I need to go and do a lot of work now. I've really got to go back to the drawing board. And I think I was a bit cocky in my early years. And when you stand up in front of an ensemble and they can tell you're not prepared and they can tell you don't know the music and you're cocky, it's a one-way ticket to uncomfortable disaster. But with an element of humor thrown in as well, of course, because you know it is music. It's like it's art. It's beautiful. It's super important. But you're not going to die. You know, well you might die inside at that moment as you throw the entire orchestra down the wrong road. But at the same time, it's the best lessons for me. Yeah, and also writing. It's, you know, you have to hear your stuff played by professional players in that acoustic environment to figure out all these elements, balance, color, you know, frequencies and so forth. And you can't get that from software. It's no way, you know. I always work in very many different ways depending on what the deadline is, I guess, but I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but what I would say is, you know, in that regard, with the trial and error, you know, sample sounds, it's all well and good, but you just got to get in a room with real players and hear it. Yeah, and then I guess, yeah, there's trial and error across all facets of your, could be all facets of your work, you know. It's also, okay, if you want to work with an artist, how are you going to reach out? Has anyone ever told you how you should reach out to them before? Because if you go in like a bull in a china shop, you might, you know, scare them off real quick. And if you don't come in with a strong enough conceptual idea, they also might not be into it. So there's kind of those elements too of figuring out for yourself how to how to put these projects together. I mean,
I'm so interested when you say about getting up in front of an orchestra and being kind of young, cocky lad. Orchestras are famously, although you might not know this if you don't work in the music industry, but orchestras famously have a kind of, each orchestra has a very unique personality, and each group of players when they come together have a very unique personality. And depending on the conductor and a number of factors, people can go into that rehearsal room and really fall flat on their face with an orchestra. And it's not uncommon for some orchestras sometimes to kind of turn against a conductor and make their life really hard. And I just wonder, you've got a reputation for being like an incredibly good person to work with, and within the industry you're really kind of liked and respected. And just generally, if you ask someone who's worked with you, you know, they're responsible, like, oh yeah, Jules, he's a great guy, yeah, he's fab. Have you ever had the experience of getting up in front of an orchestra and feeling that turn, that little sort of, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. One of my friends, he said that you've got 30 seconds to gain the trust of the ensemble when you step onto the podium or whatever. So it's not very long, and because you're working with a collection of individuals who are all so talented and so incredible at their own instrument, and they've played so much music, and they've pretty much been in every situation before you get to that platform. There's nothing they haven't experienced, from kind of extreme time pressure to too much rehearsal time, to extreme anger, to extreme to being too passive, to being too not active enough, to great problem solving, to not knowing how to solve a problem, to great inspiration, to no inspiration. So it's kind of, they've had everything, to no one in the hall, to sold out night after night, so they've kind of had all the highs and lows. You can bet your bottom dollar on that, and they all deserve to be there because they're all killer players. So essentially, well, I learned some great lessons from watching rehearsals and from discussing with with some incredible conductors. And I think some of my questions, the ones I can really pick out over the years, which helped, were, one was, okay, how do you might be in a situation where you've got an idea of really what you want to say with the piece, and you know what you're doing, the technique's all there, and your planning and preparation is all there, but for some reason there's a player in the group that's just not digging your face, and what do you do about that? And I think one of my, we're good friends now, but at the time we were just working together for the first time. I'd written some arrangements and she was conducting the program, and I was like, what do you do about that? Because I sometimes find it really affects me, and it affects my concentration and stuff. And I mean, she just said, I just completely ignore it. I just stick to the music. So everything that I'm discussing with the guys and everything we want to do is just about the music. And I think that to me was quite a reassuring, a very nice reassuring answer to know, okay, cool, if I leave my own ego at the door, because I'm not suggesting either that said player goes out to make your life hell. There could be a million reasons. They didn't get any sleep last night, they really don't like your face, maybe you're being
with the beard.
yeah, well, that happens a lot. Maybe maybe they felt you're not being honest, and so I think the honesty maybe is a good word too. It's like, if you go in and you just stick to the dots, you have a plan and you really try to work towards that, then I think naturally an orchestra, they will really respect and be into that. If they feel secure that you've got a plan, they'll go with the plan, and the second thing is reaching out to the group for help and not being afraid to do that. And again, this is all about, in the words of Quincy, is like leaving your ego at the door, basically. Like, there might be times where you need to solve a problem and they could solve it quicker than you. So why faff about trying to be sort of like the black belt? Yeah, because man, all the answers are within all of these. All of the professional orchestras are insanely good, you know. So so in some ways, you should always try to have learned or hope to learn something every time you step up in front of them. And for me, I think the times that I've fallen flat on my face were I was too arrogant. You know, I was not prepared. I was not qualified technically to undertake this music. And instead of listening to your gut feeling, because I think for most of us, because you've been through music from school to higher education, deep down inside, most of the time, you know whether you're able to undertake the musical task that's proposed. And I think at the time I was young and hungry, and I wanted to sort of to do a great job. And then I remember sort of half a day in thinking it was pretty hilariously uncomfortable, you know. It's like suddenly you've gone from like standing in the shallow end of a pool to being in the deep end, but you've lost the ability to use your arms and legs, and you're just sort of flailing around, you know. But then what's really cool about orchestras as well is that at that they will recognize when that point where that point has happened, and then they will basically kick into autopilot. And then what's kind of equally beautiful and equally sad for the person at the front about that is that you become a passenger, and you're just sort of like, you know, you're on the conveyor belt going along as they kill it. So it's uncomfortable, but also extremely impressive to witness.
But you definitely, as an audience member, you can definitely tell the difference when an orchestra is like loving it and the whole organism is working together with the conductor. It's a whole different experience, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, because it's like you need a mutual need in a way. You know, you both want to bring something to the table which lifts the music to the next level. And sometimes when you attain that altitude creatively in a concert, you'll feel everybody in the room. It's like time sort of slows down a little bit, and I don't mean that in a kind of pretentious way. I just mean it becomes really zen, and everybody's in the zone, you know. And then that's like that then almost has like a sort of a healing force. It has like a growing force for everybody, and that's brilliant. And I think also for all musicians, that's why live music is so important also to the public, because they get to share in that euphoric.
And it's sort of it all feeds each other, doesn't it? I mean, you don't get that in anywhere other than a live music experience, whether it's a huge gig in a stadium and it's you know, it's a full production, everybody's dancing and there's that kind of energy, or whether it's in a concert hall with a Beethoven symphony, and it's that the energy levels are different, but that sense, that kind of mutual experience is actually quite similar in a way. What you're creating is it's funny. It's like you're kind of almost, you get a slightly out of body moment of like, whoa, listen to these guys play. This is the most incredible thing. Because I can definitely say, for anyone that's not necessarily stood in that position that the conductors would stand, it's sort of sonically one of the best places to stand, you know. I mean, I think another cool piece of advice, which is pretty obvious of course, but years ago, was a great American arranger. I remember I had a piece that was being rehearsed in the States, and I kept jumping up on stage to like check, oh, is that line right, or does this work? And I remember he was like, dude, you need to get 5 rows back in the middle, and you need to stay there, because sonically the room's designed for you to, you know, this is the sweet spot, or at least of that hall. That thing about putting your ego aside and accepting that in a job where you have to work with a huge number of different people all the time, that in itself is a challenge. And not everybody is going to like you. Even, I'm still learning that and getting a bit better, but it's hard.
Yeah, it's funny because when you're a player, the dynamic is different when you're a player within an ensemble or when if you're conducting or leading the ensemble. I've noticed over these years that there's naturally more of a sort of, some musicians they want to keep you relatively at an arm's length so that they feel that there's really like a kind of sort of like a hybrid of professional / hierarchical kind of
professional boundaries.
Professional boundaries, right. And for me that was really hard in the beginning because I was always been quite a easygoing social guy, and I always loved team sports. I loved team this kind of team mentality, so I would often get a bit freaked out, like, oh, why are these guys why don't they really want to chat and stuff? And after a while I just realized, another great lesson is that, you'll go to do a project and 33% of the people will love it and 33% of the people don't care and 33% of them, they don't like it. That might happen, and I think in our work, once you again try to leave your ego behind and not worry about the fact that there are going to be some people just not digging it and just steam forward with the music, only the music, I feel like you can't, to some degree it's the path of least failure, or it's the potential path with the least
when you're creating something for the public element. There are always going to be people who don't like it or don't agree with it.
Oh yeah, always. I know, it's funny, isn't it, because classical music especially is so old and there's been so much written about every composer and everything's kind of chucked into chapters in books, and I mean there's a load of it. There's some incredible books and you need these writings to help you understand some of the music, of course, and the techniques and why was it this harmony then, and etc. But you kind of forget that, like, a lot of the premieres of some of the most iconic works that everybody loves, from the most hardcore classical music fan to maybe someone that's only been introduced to classical music, many of those at the beginning created riots.
Yeah, exactly.
which is pretty funny. Have there been many world premieres in the last 50 years that have created riots, out of interest? Does anyone know this?
Not that I'm aware of. I know with opera audiences particularly can be very can react badly if they don't like something, and I know of instances where, and and it depends on the country as well. Different audiences in different countries react differently. I'm sure you'll have come across this as well. But I know of some opera premieres where people have really hated it, and the audiences have just booed at the end and not clapped. And so I know of instances, but all out riots, I mean. No.
But actually, even that reaction, or some of those reactions you just described, they can to individuals within the group, that can be very affecting, can't it?
It's hard to be on the receiving end of criticism. It just is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And because audiences of all musics often feel a little sense of ownership or something, so if you take any musician that's maybe spanned a pretty broad period of time and may have gone through many different changes, like Schoenberg or somebody like that, then of course some people, they only like the early stuff, and some people, I don't like the more modern stuff. Now I'm not into that, and I guess with opera audiences, or with any audience, that's why that reaction happens, because often they're going there expecting to, or hoping even, to maybe remain in this comfy chair, and not always being open to being seriously challenged and taken to the next level. And that So in a way, the reaction is also a good reaction. You know, it's also a positive reaction, but it's hard at the time to see it like that. When, I mean, I once had a thing in Helsinki where a guy was screaming at me from like right up in the gods, and I can't even remember what he was screaming, but suddenly there was a silence between a piece, and he was just absolutely kind of going for it. And then I think he left, or I don't know what happened, but I think if that had happened when I was in my early 20s, I would have really been like, oh, what? Oh, no. And then I probably would have bored everybody by talking about it. But I think I just found it really funny, and I thought it was fine. You know, if this guy wants to freak out, it doesn't matter.
Part of getting a bit older and having more experience is that sense of that I think we've kind of touched on a lot in this conversation, of trusting that gut instinct of whether something is good or not.
Yeah, leave your ego at the door, number one. Leave it. You don't need it. You're never going to need it again. Two, you know, it's all about preparation and having a vision or a concept of the music. Three, every orchestra has different, it's all orchestras are a collection of individuals, and it's, figuring out a way to adapt to different individuals in different moments and finding a way to help them help you and help the orchestra get the best from the music is something that can take quite a long time, but it's like it can become a bit of a sort of a chess game, and once you figure out some positive moves, you'll get brilliant reactions.
And that is so intimately linked to leaving your ego at the door, isn't it, actually?
Exactly. Yeah, because you're only there to help the music, and to you're there to help the orchestra. They're not actually there to help you, so that exactly, it's kind of realizing that. So maybe there's some obvious ones for conductors. Yeah, you don't have to wear a suit. If you don't want to, just wear whatever you want to wear. Don't worry about all that stuff. It's all rubbish. And then I think as arrangers and composers, there's no substitute for an extremely well presented set of parts and score. I could give you a whole load of stuff. You could so what's the tempo? If it's a pop tune, don't write some kind of crazy ass Italian phrasing there that no one knows what that means. Write the number. That in some ways I could go into it loads, but I think as composers and arrangers, it's like the presentation of the music will save you so much time in the rehearsal room, and it will remove all the questions. And if you turn up to a rehearsal with some music that's really badly punctuated or whatever, like a word processor doc, I suppose you could look at it like that, the musicians will already form a conclusion as to how in depth you wanted to go and how in depth you're going to go that day. So there's no substitute for that. Ask questions to all musician friends. If you want to learn about the violin, if you want to learn about the electric bass, if you don't know about double stops, if you don't know how long a trombone can hold a top note for, if you don't know what the top note is, rather than going to the library and freaking out because there's 4,000 orchestration books, select one, read it. Probably you won't need another one if it's a good one, like Walter Piston or something like that, but essentially just go and ask players, because players will be happy and love to help you to grow. So I think that's also for arrangers is a great one. And lastly is, if you've got a sound, pursue that sound. If there's something you truly believe in, even if it's less conventional, don't worry about it. You've got to go for your image and stick to your guns. And that's not an ego-related thing at all. It's just, that's a vision thing. That's an artistic. It's all about artistic intent. And again, if the musicians feel that you truly want to do this, even if it's like, a flute right on the lowest note doing some crazy stuff, and it's like I don't know what it could be. There's so many crazy things you might do.
Yeah, it's true though, isn't it? I think there's a difference between artistic integrity and ego. There's two separate things there for sure.
Yeah, I think they're probably some good points. If anyone wants to ask me, they can always write me or whatever, or we could go through the website or something if there's other things I could help with. But because
or,
there's actually loads.
When we're all back together next year in Cheltenham, they can come along and meet you, and we'll have we'll probably have some career chats and sessions then when we can spend some more time going through all of this.
Yeah, cool. That'd be great. I'd love to do that.
Thank you so much for your time today, Jules.
Cool. Thanks, Camilla. I'll talk to you in a bit.